unravel me with the melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. And I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. No, I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Love has called my name, 'cause I've been born again into your family. Your blood flows through my veins. 'Cause I'm no longer a slave child of God. Cause I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. Oh, I'm no longer a slave to fear. No, I am a child of God.
Okay, this is a little different, so just got to kind of give us a second, see that, make sure we can get this working. I like to think of this more like the opportunity of getting up and sharing as more like a TED Talk on spiritual things. Not that I'm, wanting to be like a highly intellectual person like those that do TED Talks, but when you listen to a TED Talk, a TED Talk, a lot of times there's a lot of information presented, and you listen to it, and then you go, well, that sounded really good, but I just don't agree. So that's okay. TED Talks are not like information that is always intended to be absolute. It's not the final authority. Now, a lot of times when they screen people, so usually if people get on there and give a talk, they've got they usually have something very worthwhile and credible to say. But it's still left up to you as the individual to think about those things and to process them. So they didn't actually screen me for this. So I don't have that extra credibility along that line. But several years ago, I listened to somebody sent me an MP3 of a guy by the name of David Foreman, and he was a rabbi Orthodox rabbi, and he gave this talk on the Ten Commandments. And so a lot of the thoughts that I'm going to share, they really do come from him originally. But when I listen to this, and a lot of people who know me or have had interaction with me know that Judaism is very fascinating to me, right? Somehow I've been labeled a Jewish authority, and I'm not. I don't know that I really am. Would that be better? Oh, okay. I thought it was just the...
Yeah, no, the connection's just bad. Oh, there you go.
Okay, I'll try to do it. I'll try to do it with this if I can. So I listened to this talk, and it blew me away because I felt like for so much of my life growing up, I'd never really gotten any kind of concept on the Ten Commandments that really made it relevant to me today. And when that doesn't mean that I didn't think it was not relevant, to murder someone or something along that line, that you shouldn't murder. Obviously, that's a good practice, whether you're religious or not. So those things were relevant, but putting it together in a context, if you think about it, God he's just freed his people. He brought them to Egypt to put them together there as slaves. And that's how he wanted to start. So he took them there to make them slaves. And then when he is going to deliver them and bring them out, he does all of these incredible wonders, just stuff that's beyond belief, that goes against the laws of nature itself. And so he takes them out into the wilderness and starts them on this journey, and he brings them to this mountain, and he's going to make these proclamations to them. They're all going to hear his voice, and he's going to speak to them. So this is like a big moment in history. No other period of time has it happened on this scale in God's relationship, interacting with mankind on such a massive relationship. So surely God had to put a lot of thought into this, right? I mean, this wasn't just a haphazard thing, and this is God's moment to get a message to humanity that is going to be still talked about 4,000 years later. So I'm just trying to, if you can get yourself in the mindset of what it would have been like to be standing there and and see a mountain that's on fire and hear lightning and the sounds of like a trumpet this is like louder than a Neil Morse concert. I mean, it's like deafening, the sound, all the things, everything in the senses is being just pushed to the maximum the hearing, the feeling, the seeing, everything is just like, I mean, for ever since, everybody's trying to duplicate this at concerts and amusement parks. So this was the ultimate physical experience as well. So you're standing there, and then God delivers this message to you that almost seems random in some ways. He gives these, they actually come across initially as like the 10 statements, but they become commandments. So that's what I want to try to convey in talking about these things. Is this really relevant to us? Did Jesus come, and so now the 10 commandments can be shelved, and we just have to like listen to the commandments, or whatever he says? What was he kind of like? He had a better way of doing these things. What do these things even affect your decisions every day? Do you ever think about the 10 commandments when you're going to make a decision? Do you really think of them as things that affect your life every day? So now as we move on here, I've got a little side note that I want to add. This morning when I was telling Sue, I told her, I said, talking with a PowerPoint is going to be really difficult for me because I'm not really a linear speaker. I don't really like start at this point and make a straight line to that point. And she said, and I was going to give her an explanation, about I follow the path. But I didn't even get that far. She said, yeah, you're like a ping pong ball. And I was like, okay, I didn't go any further. So I'm going to try to stay on track with this thing, but believe me, it's very challenging. Okay, these are the 10 commandments that were put on 2 tablets of stone. So this is what these are. Now I've condensed them a little bit so that we could, so that there'd be an easier contrast in them. So these are the 10. Now, the first thing you're going to notice right off the bat is in Judaism and in Christianity, the beginning of these things are different. They see these things very, very differently. The first commandment in Judaism is the first statement that God made. I am the Lord your God. Now, what they believe that later happened as people were trying to understand these things is they took, have no other gods before me, make no graven images, and don't bow down to any other gods, and they like split those into 2. But in their concept, those are all really dealing with the same thing. There are no other gods as far as on God's level. God said there were no gods formed beside me. So it's not like you can really have a legitimate God in a sense in God's presence, but we make gods and we create gods and we bring those into his presence. So that I will say is, and I've been swayed. I can be swayed. I tend to agree that I am the Lord thy God is the first statement. And then, of course, thou shalt have no other gods before me. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Observe the Sabbath. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And you shall not covet your neighbor's anything. Okay? Now think about these 10. Have you ever asked yourself, what is the point of these 10? What do they mean? Why did he choose these 10? If he was only going to use 10, if you're going to just use 10 commands or statements to declare something about your relationship or about how mankind is to interact with you, why these 10? Does anybody have an idea? Hey, this is totally interactive too. Does anybody have any suggestion as to why? What would you think the point of these 10 would be? Now, and you can please speak up. There may not be the same thought that I'm looking at, but doesn't necessarily mean there's not a right answer or a wrong answer. It's just how do you view these things? Yes, Valerie.
I'm always willing because I'm newer to Christianity, so I'm like guessing half the time anyway. Well, I thought, doesn't this cover a
Okay. And so you would, if we could say like a category of like chapter headings of all the elements underneath. So as we look at that and we ask that question, if we wanted to do that, then what would we want to do as far as picking laws? We'd want to pick very general laws that were not necessarily really specific, but that were broad and covered a large area, right? And then we would want to cover laws that didn't really overlap along that line. So as we go down through them and we look at these things, and I am the Lord your God, yeah, that's pretty much a chapter type of a heading. And he says, you shall have no other gods before me. Okay, well that's kind of a little similar to the first one, but it's still, there could be elements underneath that.
It would be super clear.
Yeah, right. But if these are chapter headings, they're going to be...
Going under number 1, actually.
It could go under number 1. And what's interesting is when you get down to number 9, there are laws that God gives about lying, but this law is not a generality of lying. It's a very specific kind of bearing false witness. Doesn't mean you can't lie to someone. It's basically saying you can't lie about someone. So that's kind of interesting. That would be kind of like not really, it'd be better to just say thou shalt not lie. I mean, if you're not going to lie, then you wouldn't lie about anyone else. And 10 and 8 are kind of similar. I mean, if you're coveting something, that you're wanting something that belongs to someone else, then that seems like that preempts stealing, because you wouldn't steal something that you didn't want, right? So it's kind of interesting. What is there? Now, I think that there is actually a structure to the things that we're looking at here. But, and even in the element of like, why 2? I mean, was the typeset just like kind of big in that day? You know, that God has a big finger? When he's writing on the tablets of stone? Or why was the importance of 2? If I was doing this, I'd like get away with that, and I'd say, hey, let's get it on 1. It's definitely more, green. I mean, you're definitely using less space, and I mean, you can get it all on there. It's not really a big deal, but God was not only specific that when he gave those 10 commandments and put them on 2 stones and gave them to Moses, and he brought them down and he broke them. Then God said, okay, you go get 2 stones just like the ones that you took down and bring them back up to me. So this wasn't like a random thing that God just found a couple of stones and thought, well, hey, we'll put them on there. But he wanted 2. So if we ask God, he'd probably come back and say, no, they're perfect the way they are. Don't mess with them. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting. If we take those two tablets of stone and we kind of turn them in towards each other and we start looking at these commandments in relationship to each other, what we'll find, in my opinion, is that there are the 5 same basic principles on each stone. But yet each one deals with a different aspect of who our relationship is with. All of those commandments are aimed at us. But the first one deals more specifically with God. And the second one deals with our neighbor. But they're the same concepts. Now, let's look through it and see if that really holds up or not. I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not murder. That's me. That's just a random guy. I went with green and red because the other colors were just, I don't know, green and red just seemed good. Okay? Now, we have this idea of what is murder and what does it accomplish, or what is the purpose of murder? Okay? Well, we know that this is actually murder, right? Okay, the guy's dead. I mean, he just was killed. I'm sorry, I did that. I should have warned that this was PG-13. Strong violence, okay? That's murder. But what is murder actually? What is the purpose of killing someone? What happens when you kill someone? I mean, other than they die, what does it do for you? And I don't mean does it make you happy or things like that.
Well, it's the life. God is the giver of life. And if you take over your life and you take somebody's life, he's really the only one that's supposed to take it.
Right. And that would be and that's absolutely a correct point. But why would someone take a life? Why do we take lives?
It gives you lordship over everything they have.
Well, it can give us lordship, right? If we want what they have, and we can kill them and we can take them. So basically, when I'm dealing with another individual, when I take their life, they just no longer exist in my realm, right? So I mean, anything they've got, I could go ahead and take those things, but they no longer exist. I don't have to really deal with them anymore, do I? So when I take someone's life, I'm just basically eliminating them from my space. I don't have to now deal with that person anymore. So when we look at our communities and things like that, how do we can we actually? I mean, murder. That we just looked at a physical aspect of murder. Are there spiritual aspects of murder? Can you murder someone without physically taking their life? Why do you do that? You just make them irrelevant. What you do is you create a circle and you push them out of it, and they just don't exist to you. They're nothing. They're nobody. They've got no purpose. You've basically eliminated them. You haven't physically killed them, but they might as well just as well be dead to you because you will have nothing. They're not in your sphere. You do not acknowledge. You're not going to have to relate to them in any way, okay? So when that happens, we can see that we can do that to another person, right? When we know we can't physically murder God, but we can do the same thing to God that we can do to other people. We can make God irrelevant. We can make God of no consequence or no value, or he just doesn't really exist to us. Oh, we know he's out there someplace, but he is not in our sphere of reality. We've just pushed him out. And in a sense, we've murdered God, or we've just eliminated him from our reality, so to speak. So what God seems to be saying, and these are interesting because these things Jesus said as well. Jesus said that you don't just have to take in and include your brother, because Jesus made this statement. He goes, you've heard it said that if you commit murder, you're in danger of judgment. But I say, if you hate your brother without a cause, how do you hate somebody without a cause? You just don't like them. You just, they're just, you just don't like their looks, or there's something about them you don't like their stature or who they are, something along the line. So you basically, you just eliminate them. But Jesus said not only your brother without a cause that you're in danger in that situation, but he also said, do good to your enemies. Bless them that curse you. I mean, he extended our sphere and our circle out. Now there's people in life you're never going to meet that will never really be alive to you because you never really know them. But anyone that comes in our circle of sphere, this sphere of our reality, we've got to somehow acknowledge in some way, and we've got to deal with it, come to grips with them in some way. It is how the kingdom of God is intended to be. So what is the common principle of these two? It's the acceptance of others. The first and the sixth seem to be acceptance of God and acceptance of others around me, my neighbor. And I have to acknowledge and operate under this premise. Everybody exists. Now, let's move on to the second two. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. You shall not make any gods, and you shall not bow down to any. And number 7, you shall not commit adultery. Now on 7, I would like to say again that in which a lot of times when God gives us a physical command, there can be a spiritual principle behind it. We have a tendency to tie all things to the physical, right? Because we're physical. So we just tie. So when we think about this command, we really are thinking about very physical type things. But this command is far beyond the physical. It has to do with the relationship of people and husband and wife. In fact, in Judaism, they believe that if I as a husband begin to view my wife only for what she can do for me, what she provides, cleaning, cooking, taking care of me, all of those elements, and I don't value her for who she is, those become the predominant things that I associate with her, I've stepped into adultery first stage. Because that relationship between us is unique. There is no other relationship like that between me and my wife. This is one of the most sacred relationships that God has created in humanity. And it's to be taken care of. It's to be something that is reverenced, respected, honored, appreciated. It should be something that we should hold in very high regard. Now, when we look at the second commandment, you'll see this analogy happens over and over with God and his people. In Jeremiah, surely as a treacherous wife leaves her husband, so have you been treacherous unto me, O house of Israel, declares the Lord. So he is continually using. Now, God presents himself in this aspect of the husband and Israel as the wife. But we could switch this around. If God wanted to switch this around, he could say, you've been a treacherous husband leaving me. So it goes both ways. It's not, this just happens to be the way it's presented in this situation. So, but if you read all of Jeremiah, that's what he's equating to. Israel is when they're unfaithful to their God, they're committing adultery. They're being immoral. They're not maintaining that sacred relationship that God intends to have with his people. So, as we look at those things, we ask, well, what is the common principle between these two things? Well, they're both dealing with relationship, right? A sacred relationship. So the most sacred relationship that we know of is between man and God, or woman and God, mankind. People and God. So, and then the relationship of husband and wife is the most sacred. There's lots of important relationships. I don't think God is telling us, well, we can violate some and not the other. But sacred relationships need to be honored. And here again, you see that the second one, commandment, is referring to relationship with God. The first one is referring to relationship with other. Okay. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, and you shall not steal. Now, we sometimes have kind of like associated taking God's name in vain with what? Like cursing. Isn't that the first thing you think of when you think, don't you just hate it when people use God's name like in the form of cursing? And you sometimes people will respond, don't take the Lord's name in vain. He will hold you accountable. Okay? So, but is that, and while that's an element of it, is there more to it than that? This word for vain, which is shva, is a word that means, it means like to make something emptyless, to make it worthless, to make it meaningless, something along that line. And if you notice the aspect of take, he doesn't say use, there's an element of taking, like Pharaoh said to Abraham when he went down, he said, take your wife and leave. I mean, you'll find this word used all over. It's the sense of possessing something or taking it with you. So we're told not to take the name of the Lord in vain. And then we're also told not to steal. Now, if Brandon decides that he's got a couch, and I really like that couch, I can't just go in and take his couch, right? I mean, that'd be stealing, okay? But what if Brandon packs his couch up. He borrows my truck and packs his couch up and takes it down to the dump. And he tosses it out of the, of the truck. And I'm like, oh man, I really wanted that. So I get my truck, I go down and I pick it up and I bring it back and I keep that couch. Did I steal that couch from him? No. Why? He got rid of it. He had no value to him, right? The things that people possess have value to them. In fact, you can become attached to the things that you possess so much that if somebody's house is robbed, sometimes they can feel violated. They have this feeling of like personal violation when somebody's come into their personal property and taken something along that line. So stealing from someone is taking something that's a value of them. It's like making it meaningless to them, and you're using it in a way it's not intended to be used. It's theirs. It belongs to them. Well, it's the same way with God's name. A name in the scriptures, like you'll hear, you would read in Proverbs, it says, a good name is better than gold, right? So I got stuck with Todd, okay? I mean, how much is that worth? Like $20 maybe? I mean, but like Alexander or something like that. I mean, that's like a really cool, that's my grandson's name, but that's a really cool name. Like you can shorten it. It could be Alex, you could be Xander, Zan. I mean, all these great things from Alexander. That name's got to be worth triple what Todd is worth, right? In fact, Tot in German means death. I mean, I'm just like one D away from death there, T-O-D. Fortunately, I got two. But so that's not really what a good name meant to them. A good name, your name represented who you were. It said something about you. It was your essence. And it was a declaration of really who you were. So with God's name, this is one of the most valuable things that God is protecting in the earth, is maintaining his name. Because that's how he's going to relate to people. That's how they're going to first hear and discover of his goodness. So when we take God's name and we use it in ways that he didn't intend for it to be used, and we diminish it, like, and this would be a generality. I was thinking about this and I thought, wow, I do this sometimes, and that is, you ever see somebody or something like that, and at the end of the conversation, you say, God bless you, or you see somebody on the street, you give them a couple bucks, and they say, God bless you, and you say, God bless you too. And sometimes you're not really even thinking about God bless you. It just seems like that's just a nice thing to say to people, right? You don't really think, okay, God, would you bless this person? Whoa. Okay. Yeah, okay, I guess so. If they both go out, then we probably better rewind this thing and burn it. I don't know. Yeah, you never know. Consider, in the day of adversity, consider. So, but if I use terms like that, and I'm in my heart, they don't really mean anything to me, I'm actually using God's name in vain. I'm using it in a very meaningless way that doesn't really convey. Because you know what? It can be to the point where enough people just say, God bless you, and it becomes irrelevant to people. They don't associate God with that statement at all. It's just a nice, I'm not saying we shouldn't say God bless you. I'm just saying for myself, I wanted to make sure it passes through my mind that I really do want God to bless someone. When I say that, I want it to have meaning behind those things. So when we look at these two, again, can we find a common principle between the two of these? And I would say yes. Respecting what belongs to others. We should never take oh yes.
So, would you say that speaking of God's nature in a way that's not true, or speaking of God's nature in a way that isn't biblical, isn't true, would you say that falls along?
Yes, I would say that would be for me. And of course, now you're asking as a group. This is not a question just to me. This is a group question because we're all just working through this, right? Okay. So I would say and if somebody has some thoughts on that, there's no way I'll fill in all the thoughts that could be extracted from these things. So if you get some thoughts and you feel like you should contribute them, especially if you feel like little inspiration inside, by all means, please. Even if you feel like they challenge me in some way, I'm interested in hearing what God has to say. So, Yeah, for me personally, I want to be careful that whenever I speak of God, that I try not to speak emphatically. I want to try to always leave room that this is my understanding of God. This, through my experiences and what I'm understanding, this is how it makes sense to me. But that by no means means that this is absolutely the way that it is. You have got to work through those things too, to determine through your experience with God, his goodness or not. So yeah, a lot of times we can speak for God instead of speaking by the inspiration of God. Those are two different elements. And I would say that it would fall under this. It's just hard to know where it stops and starts. So, but thank you. That's a very good point. So as we come to the third and the eighth here, it looks like there's a connecting relationship between the two. So far, I think we're kind of got a little bit of a pattern going here. Observe the Sabbath day, and you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Now, of all the commandments, observe the Sabbath day is the only commandment that had reason. I kind of like the reason for the other ones. You know, as a father, when you're a parent or mother and father someday, the one reason that you can always fall back on is because I said so, right? I mean, because I said so. When it gets to the point where you can't get any explanations out, you're all going to resort to it. I know that those of you that don't have kids yet are like, no, you'll be there, I promise you. But anyways, this one did not have a because I said so. I mean, obviously it is because God said so. But God gave them a reason for why they needed to keep this commandment, why they needed to observe it. That's the why. Okay? In Exodus, he says, and as you read through it in red, it says, "For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh." So they were supposed to keep the commandment for this reason. Now, I know there's a lot of different concepts, and that's not and I know God is going to be able to make things make sense. But I think somehow when we ask him, how long did it actually really take you? He's going to go, 6 days. Now, it may not be our 6 days, but it's going to work out to be 6 days. I'm just convinced, because he had them doing this for hundreds of years to show that he had created the earth in 6 days. At least that's what he told them. So I'm interested to hear his take on these things. So that was the first thing that was in 6 days. But when you get to Deuteronomy, where the 10 Commandments are listed twice, they're listed the first time in Exodus in the 20th chapter, and then they're listed in Deuteronomy 5 as a rehearsing or re-going over those things. So this is the first one, because God made all creation in 6 days and rested on the seventh day. In Deuteronomy, he says, "You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm." So now, God, who has created everything, is now, he's saying, you need to keep this, because I actually got involved in this whole process I created and did all these incredible things so that I could give you deliverance because you were my people. So those are the two things that they're keeping along that line. Now, these two, because the Lord intervened in this creation to bring deliverance to his people. Okay, so this is an Israelite, a Jewish guy. It's the Sabbath day, which is actually yesterday, not today. They're probably working today. But this is yesterday, Saturday. And so he's just relaxing in front of his tent. He's drinking a Red Bull or sweet tea, whatever. And what happens is his Gentile friend comes along. And he's walking through there. He's working. He's doing his work. And he says, "Hey, bro, how come you guys don't work on Saturdays?" And like all of us, he's thinking, oh man, if I tell him the truth, it's going to sound weird. We decided it's a good time to have the day off, and we work extra hard anyways. So what is he doing? I mean, he's keeping the Sabbath. People are going to know this was a nation that was doing something different one day of the week than anybody else was doing, right? Why? Well, no, go ahead. Right. And so in a sense, bearing false witness is not necessarily telling a lie on someone. That's part of it. But if you know that somebody has not done something and they're being accused and you say nothing, you're still bearing false witness because you're not really testifying to what is true about what is going on with them. So we can bear false witness. Now the interesting thing, and I think one of the great reasons why we find this, I don't even know if this is helping, but one of the great reasons we find why this one is given a specific reason is in our day today, Jesus asked us to live in a way that validated these things, that God was the creator and God intervened on behalf of his people. He gave a specific action or law to do, but the principle behind this law has never changed. They were to that seventh day when they were resting, that was to show that God was the one taking care of them and to witness this thing, to show his interaction. Jesus didn't come so that we could be excused to rest from God's works and do our own works. He came to give us power to rest from our own works so that we could allow God to do his works through us. Do you see the difference? The Sabbath day, the principle and the concept behind the Sabbath day has not been done away with. That's what God is wanting in our lives. He's wanting us to let him be seen through us, through our actions, through the things that go on. So what is the principle? Is there a common principle between the two? Yes. Speaking honestly of others. Speaking honestly, our lives should speak honestly of God, not just in word, but in action. Can be a witness in action. Because when they were keeping the Sabbath, they weren't saying anything unless someone asked them. They were living a life that gave witness of something that God had said, hey, this is how you will witness of me. You do this and it's going to witness of me. And so those are the things that God can give us too. So let's move on to the last one. Now, I just personally love this one. I like them all. Okay? Don't want any more lights to go out. But what do these things have in common? Honor your father and mother, and you shall not covet any things that your neighbor. Couldn't seem any less related, right? Why honor your father and mother? Does anybody have a reason why you would honor your father and mother? Because God said so. Because we said so. Fathers and mothers say so. Well, what about if you got a lousy father and a lousy mother? Okay? This doesn't apply, right? You don't have to honor somebody who's a lousy parent. Or maybe your parents aren't the smartest kids on the block. Okay? Maybe you're like really a lot more intelligent than your parents. So they should really be honoring you, right? Okay? But that's not what this commandment is. This commandment isn't honor your mother and father under these terms. He says honor your parents. Why would you honor your parents? What makes them different from anyone else in this world in relationship to you? They gave you life. They created you. Essentially, they are your creators with God, but they still are your creators is how you view them. So it's interesting why he would phrase it this way. Now, so there's really no reason other than they created me. So I need to honor them. I'm not them. I can never be my parents. Oh, I will be to my kids, which I won't want to be that, but I can never be my parents to my parents. They're my parents. In Judaism, they believe that they don't care how evil your parents are. You have to find something good in each one of them and honor that. And that have value to you. Whether you feel, yes.
Well, I mean, doesn't that also, it's the example of the relationship with God and us. It seems like
I would agree with you. You're right on the track with me. You're following the ping pong ball. So it's impressive. Okay, so in like Melanie was saying, this relationship between like father and mother to us is the same thing with God. We're not God, are we? Everybody okay with that? Okay, well, you should be, because that's what God's saying. We have to accept who we are in relation to God. What is covetousness? What does it mean to covet? Oops, see, I got ahead of myself there. It's wanting something that belongs to someone else because they have it. It's not materialism. Maybe that's my next slide, I don't know. Okay, it's not. So, okay, it's not materialism, because materialism is just wanting stuff, right? You want to be rich. That's not covetousness. In fact, covetousness in this commandment is very related to your neighbor. You're not to covet his wife, you're not to covet his house, not his kids, not his money, not his car, not anything. The word anything is used at the end, which would include not just the physical things that he possesses, but his height, his good looks, his intelligence, his charisma, his ability to dance wild and crazily. I've had to really work hard on that one, on not coveting. But what you're saying is, when you're coveting something that someone else has, and essentially you're saying, my standing is incomplete. That guy, if I had his stuff, then I would be what I'm supposed to be. It's wanting what somebody else has in their structure of who they are, of what your state is in compared to their state. Your neighbor, you're okay. You're created perfectly the way that you are. When you look at someone else and they have attributes and qualities that you value, coveting those in a sense and saying, I want theirs, if I had theirs, is essentially saying I'm not really created in the way that I'm intended to be. You're okay. You're created the way that you're intended to be. And God has something very special to do with that. And so there's an acceptance of who we are in relation to God, but there's also an acceptance of who we are in relation to everyone around us. So that would be the concept behind the two. Acceptance of self in relation to others. Are you content with your status in life? It doesn't mean that you don't want to get a better education. Doesn't mean you don't want to become a better parent or a better friend, or you don't want to try to make more money to be able to take care of your family or things along that line. That's not what this is dealing with. It's dealing with how you view yourself in relationship with others. And that you should have confidence in the way that you're created. So when we look at these things, and we have God up the top, and we have us over there, and we have our neighbor over there, and I really got that animation backwards, but that's okay. Nobody's got me on any too bad of typos yet, because I'm terrible at this stuff. But if we look at this, in our relationship with God and our relationship with others, we accept God for who He is. We accept others for who they are. We respect the sacred relationships. We can see each one of these is like a big circle that just keeps getting tighter and tighter. We respect what belongs to others and what belongs to God. And we speak honestly of others, and we speak honestly of God. And then at the finality, it comes down to this little circle. We accept who we are. We're okay with that. And then God helps us through these things. Now, this is what Jesus said when they asked him about the greatest commandment. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest commandment. The second is like unto it. Love your neighbor as yourself. These two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. And then he also said, these are all from the Beatitudes. I mean, the Sermon on the Mount. This is what people call the essentials, right? Some people. Think not that I'm come to destroy the law or the prophets, for I'm not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till it be fulfilled. Whosoever shall break one of the least of these commandments, and shall teach so unto men, he shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever does so and teaches them, the same shall be called greatest in the kingdom of heaven. The fulfillment of the law is bringing out the concept of what God had in store or in mind for his new creation. Doesn't mean we don't fail at these things at times. We do. We make mistakes. We've probably murdered a few people. Not physically in my day, but emotionally, possibly. But that's not the way God really intends for me to live, because by putting these things into action, I really become a witness of his goodness and all of those things that he provides. And in doing so, that enables others to connect to him. And those sacred relationships between he and others, I need to really value those and be very, very careful myself. I'm saying this towards myself, not to you. But I want to be very, very careful that whatever my experience is along the way, that I don't ever present something or push things in a way that somehow inhibits somebody in their relationship or finding God in a deeper way. If I do that, please let me know. I will try my best to correct it, because your relationship with God is special. It needs to be valued as a marriage. I need to treat it with that type of respect. So when we come back to the 10 Commandments and those 2 tables of stone and why they're on 2, really, if they had a heading, it would be loving God and loving neighbor. And everything that's created in the law is based on somehow conveying that. The challenge of law, when we break things down to physical actions, is sometimes the actions that we can hold to. At times, if we hold too rigidly to an action, it will actually contradict the principle that it was created to reflect. Is that too ambiguous? I think of this scripture that any scripture, 3s are really important in Judaism. If God gives a law 3 times, then this is like really important. We better pay really good attention. That's what they feel like. So, but there's a law, a very weird law. I love those because they always have some deeper thought behind them. But there's this law about not seething a kid in its mother's milk. And it's given 3 times in the scriptures. It seems like it's kind of weird, isn't it? I mean, don't cook a little lamb in its mother's milk. There's a whole thing of kosher that has developed off of that law that has gone extreme in how that thing is viewed. But what is the principle? Whenever you see a law, start asking yourself, what is the principle behind this? What is each element for? What is mother's milk for? Yeah, I mean, how would an animal live? How would it get to a stage where it could eat food without first having its mother's milk, right? Especially like a cow and things along that line, okay? It's there to create life, to bring life and growth, right? But but God says, don't cook that kid in its mother's milk. In other words, the milk was made for life. It wasn't made for death. It wasn't intended to cook it in it. And the things of God, we can do that sometimes. Sometimes we can take things that are intended for life and become so rigid and hard in our presentation and how we apply those things that we can actually promote death. We can kill people with that stuff. That probably doesn't apply to you guys. But I think about that myself a lot because I want to be cautious that the things that God intends for life are never used. I never use those in a way that does anything that would bring death or something negative in a person's life. So that brings me to the end. I'm at the last slide, right? Yay. Wasn't as hard as I thought, I guess. So, well, anyways, that I just wanted to share those thoughts with you. Those thoughts that I heard this rabbi give, they so impacted me that really is what caused me to want to start listening to more and trying to get some of the concepts in Judaism, because I found that this did not challenge what I believed. It actually made more sense. You take these concepts and go back and read the Beatitudes or the Sermon on the Mount, and you'll see that Jesus is not trying to like raise the bar or create a new set of laws. He's trying to explain where they got caught up in the literalacy of things, of how they were missing God's point and what the value of these things really meant. So if anybody has anything else they'd like to contribute, or they would like to say or feel inspired, or even if you disagree with something, hey, I mean, that's okay. It creates discussion, right? Well, maybe we'll get something even better.
I also was raised in a little church thing going on too. Thanks, Todd, for that. That was really good. Not often do people try to break down the Ten Commandments. When I first learned about the Ten Commandments, I was like, oh, that's whatever. And then it was like, if you do these things, you're going to die, literally, in the Old Testament, which was cool. And then I was like, oh, okay. But the way that I always saw it was these first three were the way we relate to God, which he counts as the most important. How we relate to God is the most important part of our lives. That is our life. I've never seen it sandwiched before, so that was cool. I'm going to think about that for a while. The other thing is then how we relate to God and then how we observe God. So he wants to make sure that no matter what we do in our daily life, in our weekly life, that we take a space to see and say, we worship you, God, for the things that you've done for us. And then this is also kind of an act of worship because it's also from that creation. And then these things have to deal with our thoughts, because if you're going to murder someone, you've thought about it for a long time. You've garnered hatred towards someone. If you're going to commit adultery, you've thought about it for a long time, or maybe not. But it's something that you've allowed your mind to wander to. If you're stealing, you've allowed your mind to think about, oh, I really want that thing, so I'm going to take it because I'm better than the person that has it right now. It's the way we relate to the community around us. So the way we relate to God, our family, the community around us. And then bearing false witness, I feel like these two are a little bit more separate, but they also are kind of how we relate to our community. And if we don't say the things that we need to say and speak truth, not just our truth, but the truth, then again, we're destroying our community because we're not following the way that God laid us out to relate to each other. So anyways, that's all. Thanks, Todd, for bringing that up. Seriously, a hard time to do the Ten Commandments, but that's impressive.